between India and Saudi have only been improving. There's an 8 million strong Indian community as well back in Saudi Arabia. So very significant visit of Mohammed bin Salman in the country. Maroof Raza also on the broadcast with us. Maroof, apart from, of course, the Middle East corridor that's likely to be high on the agenda, there's also a lot of trade and investment ties on the anvil.
Yes, absolutely. But before that, let me just mention to you that a guard of honor is amongst the highest honors that India bestows on visiting heads of state. Now, technically, Mr. Mohammed Bin Salman, Prince MBS, is not the head of state of Saudi Arabia. He's the crown prince. But de facto, he runs the country on the instructions of his father, who's still very much the king. The second thing is, the guard of honor is the big step that India takes to recognize your standing in your part of the world as a partner of India. Remember, after the Kargil conflict, Musharraf was given a guard of honor and given legitimacy as the self-styled president of Pakistan. Now, third thing is, in the guard of honor, we lay out the best spectacle that we could as a country as a rising military power, and a country that has a professional military, which is a blow for blow, more than a match for Pakistan, which has steadily, for decades, been Saudi Arabia's go-to military option for providing security forces within Saudi Arabia, for providing defense technology and nuclear weapons, as I mentioned. But President Bush, when he was given a guard of honor in India, did mention that he's been to many capitals in the world, but this is as good as it gets. So it's a very, very well curated, salami that's given to a visiting head of government. And he is a head of government, though not a head of state. Also, Saudi Arabia and India have been steadily moving towards very important strategic linkages. It's been brought out by Rishabh. We have nearly 5 million Indians as diaspora in Saudi Arabia. To give you a relative context, this is the size of the entire population of Scotland. So India, Saudi Arabia, population exchange, professional exchange, technological exchange are very big areas. And finally, and most importantly, Saudi Arabia is looking for countries with deep pockets to buy its oil. India needs oil and energy, and Saudi Arabia is still amongst the second largest producers of oil in the world after the United States, and Russia very closely following. But with Russia now providing India 22% or more of India's oil requirements, Saudis are obviously getting nervous because there is a requirement for them to sell oil to modernize the country, as you have rightly brought out, on the vision of Prince MBS. So those are the key areas. And of course, Saudis are looking at also investing in India in various projects. The UAE had some years ago mentioned that they wanted storage facilities in India for their extra oil. I'm sure the Saudis don't need it because they're well endowed with that. But the large tourism population from India to Saudi Arabia, with the Muslim population regularly going for pilgrimage there, is a very big draw for the Saudi economy. You can imagine Britain survives on 2 million tourists every year. So we have more than 4.9 million Indians there, plus many more going from here, which is another going to be a big pump in their economy. The Saudis are also investing in a local football league, which is an investment initially Prince MBS has made of $1 billion. But I don't know if it's going to pick up the way as other football leagues do, but they're certainly trying to emulate the example of Qatar. So these are things that were never thought of 10 years ago in Saudi Arabia, sporting facilities and all that. And the population will feel a diversion from the hard work, poverty, and heat that makes up life in Saudi Arabia as some kind of an outlet. And Mr. Modi has been very smart to engage with Saudi Arabia despite a lot of criticism of Prince MBS. And you might remember the murder of a Saudi journalist in Turkey, whether that had a role by him or not. There were conflicting statements that came from CIA and the US. But Mr. Modi has clearly looked at India's strategic potential, and the Saudis can help us with it because we need oil and energy to get to the next level of growth. Without that, unless we find alternate sources, and America has been talking about 6 small nuclear reactors, but nuclear energy makes up about less than 9% of our calculation. Right now, we actually only harness about 3.5%. So we need to look at that possibility. And once we get into the second stage of nuclear building, with the massive thorium reserves that we have, India can actually become a supplier of energy and nuclear-related energy, at least to the neighborhood, minus Pakistan, than to the rest of the world. And of course, the big trade corridor. This is a real punch in the nose for China's initiative of the BRI. But the BRI is not going away anywhere. It's been around. This week is the 10th year of the BRI. And Chinese president has put his entire foreign policy on line with BRI. And if BRI continues the way it does, minus the hiccups, because they lend money and are very ruthless in extracting the returns, including pieces of land as they did in Sri Lanka.
Okay, so high on the agenda, like you mentioned, is going to be the India, Middle East, Europe shipping and rail connectivity corridor. It was one of the biggest takeaways of the G20. The Prime Minister spoke about, the significance of it. The US President Joe Biden also called it a big deal. So this is going to be extremely significant. Immediately after the G20